Hey everyone, this is Saptarshi here and I welcome you back to our course on machine learning using Python. So today we are at the first lecture on neural networks, and I don't think I really need to motivate you to learn neural networks, which is most probably right now the most popular family of algorithms. So we'll start by looking at neurons, okay, and then we will look at some of the mathematical abstractions known as threshold units. We will look at one such, threshold unit in more detail known as perceptron, and we'll see how this can be used for classification. So we can establish the link between neurons and our machine learning tasks. Okay, so if we talk about machine learning is a part of artificial intelligence for sure. And whenever we talk about either artificial intelligence or talk about natural intelligence, we attach it with human brain, right? And one of the grand visions of artificial intelligence was actually to come up with artificial brain, okay? And the basic units of human brain, okay, are brain cells, are known as biological neurons. So at a very rough level, it will look something like this, okay? So these structures, these hand-like structures, these are called as synapses, and from this synapses, stimuli or the inputs goes in, okay? So some response or some processing happens in the body over here, and if the processed information is high enough, then this neuron fires and this information flows through this, which is called as axon. So this structure is called as axon, and now this response that is produced is available again through this claw or hand-like structure, which are called as dendrites, okay? So this is at a high level different components of a biological neuron. So you can abstract it and say it is a basic computation unit which takes input from some neurons, processes it, and gives output to some other neuron. Okay. Now one thing is there that the inputs can come from different neurons. Like we can receive different stimuli from our different sense organs, different inputs can come, and they are associated with some kind of weight. So all stimuli will not treated with equivalent weight or equivalent weightage, okay? So the thing that determines that is the synaptic connection between this neuron and the other neuron, which is known as the synaptic weight, okay? And this is how the neurons can be interconnected. So you can see that this neuron is producing some output which goes to multiple neurons. In turn, this neuron is again connected with this neuron, okay? And for the brain, actually there are 80 to 100 billion nerve cells, okay? And each neuron is connected to more than 1,000 other neurons. So the total number of connections in brain can be around 60 trillion. So these are a couple of motivations for computer scientists, right, to study about study about how this can be simulated. Okay, so you have a basic computation units and you can have networks of them. So these networks of them can actually achieve astonishing feats. So the first such attempt was way back in 1943, which was by McCullough and Pitt, and here the inputs and outputs were binary, and they could do some kind of simple logical operations like AND, OR, etc. Okay, and these inputs were aggregated. If they are more than a certain thresholds, the output will be 1, else there will be 0. So the more famous model was the perceptron model, which was invented in 1957 by Frank Rosenbell. Here, in the contrast, input and output were real and weights were used. Okay, so if you think of a computation model, it can look something like this. So these actually represents the biological neuron that we saw. Okay, so what is happening over here is different inputs are coming. So these are coming from different neurons. Okay, and these weights actually represent the synaptic connection between this input and this particular neuron. So they are getting aggregated. There is something called as a bias, which plays the role of a intercept, like linear regression model, etc. And then there is some other function which applies on this aggregated input. Okay, so if this function gives some response and produces some output, then the neuron fires and this final output is available. Okay, so this is your artificial neuron, and a network of such artificial neurons can be called as artificial neural networks. Okay, so there is a lot of skepticism that whether this can be really called neural networks, how much similarity is there, or how much authenticity is maintained between the biological neurons and artificial neurons. Well, the skepticisms are valid, but please remember, one of the famous quotes by a famous statistician George Box, that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So what that means is that whenever you are trying to model a complex phenomena, you will have to make some assumptions, right? So they might not be real. There might be something not right about them, but in spite of that, they can give us good results. And in a more simplified way, this can be represented like this. So these are inputs going on and aggregation is happening, and then a function is applied on these aggregated inputs and the output is available. Okay, all right. Let's now quickly recap the binary classification problem. Okay, and the binary classification problem, we can also think the model to be a computational units like this. Okay, so here is the analogy that comes with our computational units with neural net. So the inputs are going in over here and the output is coming out. This output is the class level, right? And if you remember that, if we plot the data in a 2D plane, and if there were two type of classes, so a classifier actually tries to draw a line which works as a decision boundary. Okay, so there can be one class which are represented by plus and another class represented by these curves. Okay, so basically a linear classifier tries to draw a line which is also called as a decision boundary. All right. So let's look at a very small toy example which has got 4 observation or 4 rows. Okay, so what we want is that if they are plotted in a scatter plot, they look like this, and if they are fed into a mathematical model like this, which is similar to the mathematical model that we talked about in Perceptron, that these inputs are given, they are associated with some synaptic weights. Okay, they are aggregated over here, and some function is applied. So after we do that, if for each of these rows it can correctly give the labels as 0, 0, 0 and 1, then this basic model can work as a linear classifier. Okay, so that's the basic idea, which will of course represent some kind of a line in this scatter plot. All right, so let's start by assuming that W1 and W2 are 1 and 1 respectively. Okay, and what we are going to do now is let's put W1 and W2 and 1, and let's look at this aggregated value. Okay, so we'll just sum it up, right? W1 and W2 are 1, so 0.2 is 0. Plus 0.3 is 0.5, 0.2 plus 0.8 is 1, and so on and so forth. All right. Okay, so now we are representing a threshold value. All right, and the threshold value can be, so if you look at this as a step function, so basically what we are telling is that we'll have a value like t. If this aggregated value is greater than this t, then we will get a value of 1. If it is less than t, then we'll get a value of 0. Okay, so essentially that is what we want to find out over here, that what can be a value of t. So it can be any value between 1 and 1.8. Okay, and let's take the value of 1.3 over here. Okay, so I can think that if x1 plus x2, or rather w1 x1 plus x2, okay, is less than 1.3, right, then it is 0, and if it is greater than 1.3, then it is 1. So this line actually can represent a decision boundary. Okay, somewhat like this. So this will be the line. So anything beyond this line will be the 0 class, and anything other side of the line will be the 1 class. So which is very similar to your support vector classifiers. Okay, so now this equation can be written as, so u can be written as sigma I equal to 1 to n wi xi, and z is a function of u. Okay, so for simplicity right now we are omitting the bias value, which can be simply or trivially thought as another input. X and w can be treated as vectors. Okay, so this is one of the important things, and this expression can be written as this multiplication. Okay, so where w is a vector representing the weight vector, and x is also the input vector. Okay, so if you find the dot product, this is same as this aggregation, and sigma actually represents the function that you are applying. So right now sigma is nothing but the step function. This sigma has a name which is called as activation function. Okay, we could understand very clearly that this perceptrons can be used for binary classification. However, uh, how do we know this W1 and W2s? Okay, so this W1 and W2 are actually the knowledge of the neural networks. Okay, and this is what actually the neural network wants to learn. So what is the learning process? Okay, so the learning process is like this. So let's say I start with x1 and x2, these values, and I randomly pick some values for W1 and W2. So maybe the values are minus 0.4 and minus 0.3. So what we do is we first calculate u, so which comes to be 0.01. How this comes? So it is 0.2 plus into 0.4 minus 0.4 plus 0.3 into 0.3, and that's how you get this 0.01. Okay, so here the threshold that we take is 0. Okay, so if it is positive we give the value 1, if it is negative we give the value 0. So these are the value that your neural network is producing, and this were the actual thing that was expected. Okay, so this t minus y is the error, right? So here for first one the error is -1, for the second one the error is -1, and that way for the last one the error is 1. So the total error, if I sum up, is -1. Okay, now please try to understand that based on the errors actually we can update the weights. Okay, so if I am producing a output which is less than the desired output, which is happening over here, then what we should do, we should okay, so if we are getting an output which is more than the desired output, then we will reduce the weight. So here actually we are producing more output, so we should reduce the weight, and if it was the other way round, we will increase the weight. Okay, so let us take a simple illustration. So let's say right now the weight are indicated by W new. So this you can think as W1 new. Okay, so basically you can subscript it W1 new, and there is also W2 new. Okay, so W1 new will be W1 old. So whatever was there, if there is no error, so it's very clear, right? If the error is 1, that is that your output is your output is less than the desired output or actual output, then you should increase the weight. Okay, so there is an additive effect. Similarly, if you are producing less, you should decrease the weight. Okay, now there is a term which is used, is called as beta, right? So this beta we have seen as the learning rate in our gradient descent as well as gradient boosting. So basically this is used so that there is no overfitting, or we do not converge to local minima very quickly. All right, so let us take a value of beta as 0.01, and let's further calculate W1 and W2. So these are your new W1 and W2. So you can see that the weights has reduced as as E was -1, right? So you can see the E to be -1. And now if I further calculate U, so I will get values like this. So this also comes to be minus. Okay, so what happens is that all the y's are now the first 3 y's are 0, the last one is 1, which exactly matches the output, so there is no error. So your algorithm can stop over here. Okay, so this just convergence, so there is no error, so you can say that your algorithm has converged. So this converges just in one iteration. Okay, so this is also called as epochs in artificial neural network training terminology. So let's look at this perceptron learning algorithm more formally now. Okay, so you will be given a data set with xi and yi. Okay, and it will be having for the training observations. Okay, so we'll start by initializing the weight vector with random values, and then for each training observation we'll compute the predicted output. Okay, so this was represented as y. Okay, and for each training observation, so that's why you are mentioning as I. And why it is k? Because you will do it in multiple iterations, so you just want to differentiate between yik minus 1 and yik. For each weight wj, update the weight. Okay, so in our case there were only two weights, w1 and w2. If you have more such weights, that many times this loop will run. Okay, and the formula that we have already seen, so this is the learning rate. Okay, and instead of all these three cases we have represented yi minus yi dash k. So whenever this is bigger, the weight will increase, and whenever this is smaller, the weight will decrease, and xij is your input value. All right. Okay, so this loop ends for the weights, and for the training examples this loop ends. Okay, and this will continue until stopping condition is met. So either there is no error, or the error is very less, or you can also run it for certain fixed amount of iterations. Okay, so this is how actually this algorithm will learn. All right, so let's try to understand this with a visualization. So basically what this perceptron is trying to do is, it is trying to fit a line. These are your two classes, and you can understand that w1x1 plus w2x2 will give you a line, right? Now the question is that how this works. So let's say that you have some random values that for w1 and w2. So this will represent a line like this. All right, now you are doing some random initialization, or this was random initialization. You calculate the error, and when you calculate the error and compute your new w1 w2, maybe in your second iteration this is your line. In third iteration, maybe you are little better, and in your fourth iteration you are somewhat okay, or maybe little better, and now in the fifth iteration you have found w1 and w2, where the perceptron has learned the weights so that it can fit the decision boundary for this binary classification problem. Okay, so in this lecture what we tried to tell you is that what was the motivation of biological neural neurons to be used as artificial neural networks, and how perceptron, which is one of the basic units, can be used for linear classification. Okay, thank you so much guys for watching this video. If you had learned something, please like and subscribe our channel. Thank you so much guys.